And so I was like, Dracula has a really hard time with love.
This is Good One. I am Jesse David Fox, writer at Vulture and author of comedy books. My guest today is Jason Segel. We talk about being one of the biggest comedy stars in the world, starring on How I Met Your Mother and making movies like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and how he had to take a bit of a break after that crazy moment in time to figure out what he really wanted to do with his work, which brought him to Shrinking, the AppleTV Plus show he stars in, about a therapist who has to put himself and his life back together after his wife dies. Jason is easily one of the biggest, most revolutionary comedic writers and performers of my lifetime, and we get into how he did it. So here is Jason Segel.
Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. It's good to see you.
So I want to start where you currently are as a creator, artist, actor. So as we're speaking, you're currently shooting the third season of Shrinking, a show which comes 25 years into a career of making comedy with varying doses of drama and sort of the reverse as well. Is there a scene of yours from the show that you feel really represents where you currently are as an actor?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think there's like one scene in particular from Shrinking that comes to mind is in the finale of season 2. I give a speech to Alice, where my daughter, where I finally come clean to her about how guilty I feel about what a terrible father I've been. The test of a moment like that is how honest are you willing to be on screen? Are you willing to not show off? Are you willing to not try to make everyone think you're a really good actor? But what I like about it, what the comedy around it is people under stress, to me, are like super funny. The moments leading up to giving a big, honest talk are really fraught. You're like moving weird and you might be sweating a little bit. And that to me is kind of representative of where I am right now, of trying to be as honest as I can be about these big dramatic moments, but also being honest about how fucking, am I allowed to swear? How awkward life is.
Yeah.
It's so awkward. Even when we're trying to be our most serious, we're clumsy.
Yeah. I mean, nothing in life that feels serious happens without people having a sense of humor about it for the most part. I think if that is and if you do play drama fully dramatically, it will feel less real than if you play it that you are aware that there's a sort of comedy of it. Yeah, I was thinking about the relationship with you and your daughter, because it's like for the first 10, 15 years of your career, you're playing friendship or romantic relationship.
Yeah.
Like you're playing relationships, I think, defined a lot of your early acting. And to sort of come back in this way to be playing a father is different. And it allows you to sort of explore a lot of different things in terms of what their expectations are, what the age difference between you and the other actor is, how you can be funny to your daughter in a different way. Can you talk about how you approached that relationship?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting dichotomy in that I don't think our brains, our self-image ages with us, with like our biological age. So I at first look at Lukita and I think of her as my contemporary, and then at some point she calls me Mr. Segel. I'm like, oh, what the fuck has happened in my life? But that's not totally honest either, because I do think, how old are you?
I'm about to turn 40.
Okay, cool. I'm 45. And it's been a complicated 20 years. You know what I mean? And I think it would be a shame to not be standing a little sturdier and be like, yeah, I'm 45 and I've actually been through a lot. I have a lot to say about the subjects we're doing now. So at once I feel like the same kind of big birdie childlike wonder thing. But I also feel like someone who's been through a lot and has some scars.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing when you watch this show has a scene will have a lot of moves in it. Like it's not just like, oh, this is a dramatic scene and this is a comedic scene. Yeah. It's like truly like you're kind of doing it and you're kind of going up a little level. And I imagine part of that is you have to do each part of that different, and then in the edit you figure out. Can you talk about how you approach that? I think there's a scene in the first episode of the second season where you're talking to your daughter where you're apologizing and be like, I'm going to be better. But then there's also
Yeah.
little moments where you're cheating out.
I really appreciate you noticing that. I work really hard on that. I'm very obsessed with prep.
Mm-hmm.
I did a movie called The End of the Tour years ago that I was really afraid of, and I started really young, so I had no system of prep, that I learned, and so I just played what would Edward Norton do. It was just straight up fake it till you make it, and I front loaded everything I was afraid of. I got a dialect coach. I learned all these lines perfectly, and this is different because all of those movies that we were doing earlier on, they were so improv heavy that your job was kind of to show up nimble, But this, I showed up like really, really prepared, and it was the most like surfing-like experience I've ever had where, like your prep kicks in, and it just felt calm and effortless, and like it could be honest, and you could listen. You weren't trying to think of what you needed to do next. So now I prep that hard for everything, and it just makes life really easy. I look at the scene, I chart out where the different moves are because, I think that you should arc out each scene the same way you arc out a whole script, so stuff stays interesting. I also think, sorry, but just to go back, I'm having another thought. I think also what makes this show good, and I think I've discovered is like a kind of Trojan horse, is that you need moves like that to lower the audience's defenses for the drama. So you are using comedy so people feel like, oh, this is going to be fun, and then you fucking knock them with some drama, and they're not. It's like what we were talking about. If you're in drama on drama, I think your defenses go up. Like, I don't want to cry during this whole hour and a half,
Yeah.
So I do think that's the benefit of moves.
What do you think your comedic persona, your catalog, even your physicality affords you with the audience in a show like this?
Well, I write for myself a lot. And so I have to be self-aware about this stuff. And I do think that, I don't know if it's my face shape or like kind eyes. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you can get away with a lot with me doing it without the audience turning on me. So we knew that. I told that to Bill Lawrence and Brett Goldstein when we were writing the pilot. Like, you can have Jimmy at rock bottom be doing things that you might be afraid would turn the audience, and I promise you, from years of doing this, they're just going to think like, "Oh, I hope he gets better,"
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that that's a real advantage because there's a lot of comedy like past the line.
Yeah.
But normally you can't go there because the audience will turn on the character, and like the big note is make sure your lead is likable. But I think if there's something else, it's like a style of acting that I learned first from Kermit the Frog. Not making a joke.
Sure.
And I think as you get older, that becomes like Tom Hanks or Jimmy Stewart, which is like a surrogate style acting. I am you. There's another kind of acting, like if you're James Bond, that's like aspirational, like they're better than you, like, oh my gosh, look at them go. But I think hopefully what I try to do is like, oh, look at me in that situation.
Yeah, I imagine also because a lot of the people watching grew up with you.
Isn't that weird? I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. I am just me, and so I also have like whatever built-in self-deprecation where I have a hard time like fully feeling viscerally that like, oh, people like really know who I am. It's a very weird thing.
Yeah. There's something that I found really interesting, which was you're talking about how you got the role, and it was Bill Lawrence saw you on a walk, I think Bill Lawrence's producer saw you on a walk in Ojai.
Yeah.
And he goes, he seems happy.
Yeah.
And it stuck in my mind because I remember I was reading that the reason you were cast at the end of the tour was the director said, I saw you, and I said, well, that guy's unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the reason I take those walks is because I'm like trying to get to zero.
Yeah. So it's like, do you think that's in it also, that the audience is feeling that aspect of you, this sort of war of happy versus unhappy?
I hope so. It's like, I think it's what I have to contribute.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I mean, for like probably 10 years I've been thinking about this, but more and more every day. why am I doing this job? What do I have to contribute that is like unique to what I have to offer? And I think it's that I have an unquiet mind. I have a hard time settling into happiness. I can catch it for a minute, but I find it elusive, and then I got to find it again and put together all these tools, and it gets exhausting to use the tools. You look around at people like, do they not have to do anything to seemingly be so happy? I try to remind myself, like, which brings me some peace. The same brain that makes life feel a little complicated for me is the brain that thinks of the Dracula puppet musical.
So I want to talk a little bit about Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Oh, sure.
Because there are two scenes that really point to you, go, that's Jason Segel.
Yeah.
That's the thing that it pops up, and it's exciting to see.
Cool.
So the first is the breakup scene. Start with where it came from.
Yeah.
But then to actually make it a scene in a movie.
So what actually happened was I was dating somebody, great person, who was away, and when they got back in town, they called me from the airport and said, I need to come see you. And in my 24-year-old brain, I thought that meant like I want to have sex. So I said, yeah, come on over. And when she arrived, I was waiting on the couch completely naked in like that Burt Reynolds pose, like kind of coquettish. And I said, I've got a surprise for you. And then she said, we need to talk. And it's never like, we need to talk. I love you so much. I knew instantly what was happening.
Yeah.
I knew that I was naked. And this like breakup began. And the whole time I am thinking to myself, I swear to God, and this is like a problem, but the whole time I was thinking to myself, this is going to be so funny when I put it in a movie. I mean, the thought was like literally occurring to me as it's happening, like, oh, this is perfect. Nothing more perfect has happened than this moment. The thing that got cut out of the movie, which is actually my favorite part of the story, is like halfway through the breakup, I turned to her and I said, I need to go get dressed. And she said, okay, go get dressed. And I went back into my bedroom, and picking out an outfit for the second half of a breakup is like the hardest outfit I've ever picked up. I was back there for like 10 minutes, ripping clothes off of hangers and everything. And then I came back in a button-up blue shirt and khaki pants tucked in. And I said, I'm wearing your favorite outfit. She just looked at me, and the breakup finished. Turning it into a scene in a movie, I think that she left and I went home. I went back upstairs and I wrote that scene. It was like, I knew it was the start of a movie. So I wrote that scene, and then how this all unfolded was actually really crazy. But we had just done Knocked Up, and Knocked Up did well, and Judd took me to a Laker game and was like, "Hey, I think it's your at bat. Do you have any ideas?"
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, I actually started writing something," and I had the like loose idea for Sarah Marshall, and I pitched it to him at a Laker game, and the next day, like contracts arrived from Universal to go write the movie. Really crazy, right? It's not like that now. And so I went to Hawaii and wrote this movie, and there was a lot of resistance about two things: a lot of resistance about the full frontal nudity and the Dracula puppet musical.
The two things we're going to be talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
The things that will be remembered forever.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I guess that's right. When you say like these are the things that are uniquely you, those are the things that I fought for most, because I was like, no, this is what makes it different. Look, the thing I hate about a romantic comedy is you're going to put a guy on a poster and a girl on a poster with some artificial opposition, like he's a scientist, she hates science, and they're going to end up together at the end. So I'm like, how do you make this different? And the thing about the full frontal nudity, it wasn't just like being an exhibitionist. It was that if the opening scene, your male lead does full frontal nudity, because it hadn't really happened at this point yet, you're forced to throw out your expectations. But I don't know what the fuck is going to happen in this movie. And that's an awesome place for comedy.
Yeah.
If you don't know what's going to happen. And so that was that. And it was really scary to shoot it. And they were very respectful about it. But we found out all these rules about like
how long. Well, I want to talk about this sort of, because there's many these are the slight decisions that tip the scene one or the other. And I'm curious if you remember from, and it could have been in the writing stages. I know Judd has people rewrite things over and over again. That could be in how it's improvised or shot. There could be also in the edit. It could be after you get feedback from an audience in the edit, and where it's like, how much do you want to tip your hat that you know this is a funny scene?
Yeah.
And how much do you want to play it? We're not even acknowledging this is a funny scene. Because like there's really basically like 2 nods where Kristen a little bit in a comedic performance is like, you want to like put your clothes on.
Yeah. If this is my point of view.
Yeah.
If something like that is going to happen, it's taking care of the comedy.
Yeah.
So you should then write a dramatic scene.
Yeah.
And it's actually the advice Judd gave me about comedy early on, which I still keep to this day. And I'm actually the voice of this point of view on Shrinking quite a bit, where I'm like, write a drama. That's what the audience is actually there for. And it'll be funny because the people you've hired are funny. I think Judd said to me once, like, if you write a drama, it's going to end up being funny without you trying.
Yeah.
Because of how you see the world. So I think that scene you just write as a drama, you play it as a drama. The only thing that I'm aware of when I'm doing a scene like that, or like the scene with Alice, like I said, is I think people move funny when they're under stress. Like they do weird things with their arms, or like you try to put your hands on your hips, but you do it too high. Like I'll do shit like that. But besides that, I try to play it as a drama. The big question in editing was, how often do you cut back to my dick?
Yeah. Were you pro more or pro less often?
We actually did pretty thorough testing of that scene. My favorite, so this is the first thing I've ever written. It's like my first time I've ever been a lead. And I went to the first test screening, and it played the whole movie played so great at the first test screening, like your dream. Like it really could not have been better. So then we do the Q&A after, which is how test screenings go. I'm hiding in the back. No one knows I'm there. And people are like, they love it. They love this. They love that. And then one guy, it's always one guy, raises his hand. And they're like, yes. He said, is no one going to talk about this guy's weird dick? Like, it had never occurred to me it was weird ever in my life.
Where you could tell that guy the whole movie was like, is it going to come back?
Yeah. And it does.
Yeah.
And we get him one last time.
Obviously, you have not done that since, but like it does feel like that scene is like a talisman or whatever to something in you. Like, can you think of like, are there moments when you're shooting anything where you're like, well, what is the version of this of having my dick out?
Yes, for sure. Well, it's interesting. I made a conscious choice because there are a few things where like it was physical nudity. It's not showing my dick, but like do it a bit and Knocked Up. It's just a few times where I do that, and I started to feel like this is so. I like really don't want to repeat myself.
Yeah,
and I didn't realize at that age that one of the things that you're really encouraged to do is repeat yourself. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, that worked really well.
Do it
again. Do the old number 22, and like you start doing increasingly less vital copies of yourself. And I got really tired of that. So I stopped doing it like physical nudity stuff. But I do think, so I know we're going to talk about the Dracula musical too, but the nudity and the Dracula musical, both while I was having this sort of existential crisis at 33, I was like, don't forget the guy who was that guy, who was like brave enough to say, it makes sense after it works.
Yeah.
But before it works, it's like people are telling you don't do this. But I really believed in it. I knew it was right. And you become like increasingly savvy and you stop doing that stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean? You become too aware of what works. And so I think that as I've evolved, when I try to think of like who is the guy who did the full frontal nudity, who is the guy who did the Dracula puppet musical, it's being willing to like be ugly on camera, be ugly emotionally, be vulnerable, be just weaker than I think that you would normally want to be as a male actor on screen and say like, no, people feel this way.
Talk about thinking of the sort of Dracula musical, where it lived in you, and then what it meant to write a movie where a character was making the Dracula musical and what it said about that person, and then what ultimately it was saying about you.
Sorry for all the wrong I've done.
So that song I wrote about the same breakup. And I recorded it as just like a very fucking morose, emo, like human being, not Dracula, singing it. And I sent it to everybody. I was like, we broke up. Probably was like the subject. And then just this fucking song. Because I was that guy. And I still am to some extent. I try to reserve it for, like making stuff. I mean, I was really sad. And so I wrote that song. And then I'm also really weird. And so I was like, Dracula has a really hard time with love. It's also really hard on Dracula.
Yeah. So you wrote the song not about Dracula?
No, I wrote the song as me.
Yeah.
And then I was feeling...
Jason's Lament.
And then I was like, boy, this would be really hard on Dracula. Because he has to live with this for eternity.
Yeah.
This is like... I was also smoking a lot of weed at the time. Yeah. But anyway, so I recorded it as Dracula. Because I had a habit of recording a lot of songs about love as Dracula. I would like do covers of like All You Need Is Love as Dracula, but I would say All You Need Is Blood. I don't know why at the time. So Gary Oldman's Dracula was like really impactful on me. So I wrote this song as Dracula, and then I was like, oh. And I was already a puppeteer at this point. So I was like, I had puppets all over my house, and I would make little short films with them. So I got in my head that I was going to make a Dracula puppet musical. And I was in a bit of a stall in my career, if you can call it that. I was like 24 when I wrote this movie. So I was like, I was just too young to play anybody serious, and I was too old to play a kid. And, you're in this weird in-between stage. So I was like, what I'm going to do is write this Dracula puppet musical. So I recorded that song. And I triumphantly burned it on a CDR. And I drove over to Judd Apatow's house. I called him. I said, I have to show you something. I need your help. And I played this song for him. And he sat there respectfully and listened. And then he said, you can't play this for anyone ever. And I sort of put it away.
Yeah.
So then as I was writing Sarah Marshall, and we were like trying to think of like the main guy's job as always, anyone's job. It's always like this kind of mushy area. Like, what does a real person do for a job, And I want it to juxtapose well with Sarah Marshall, where they're like kind of tangentially in the same field, but he can feel less than her, So I decided to make him a composer because I knew it would give me a chance to play music and the thing. And then the Dracula musical popped into my head. And I was like, if we're going to be personal in this thing, let's be personal. And let's have his dream be to make this Dracula puppet musical. And it was half self-aware of, I know that this is a pathetic thing to give somebody as their dream. But honestly, another half of me was like, I'm going to show everybody that this was a good idea.
Yeah, all you needed was the frame of it. It is a bad idea for people to be open to it. To be like, oh, it's a good idea because if it's done self-aware.
So many people now are like, when are we going to see the Dracula puppet musical? Exactly.
Yeah, I think you'll get asked that question for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
When will you make a Dracula puppet musical?
Yeah. We have a good idea for it, actually. Nick Stoller and I have a really good idea for it's like, I don't even know if you'd call it a sequel or like a spin-off of Forgetting Sarah Marshall about Peter trying to make the Dracula puppet musical.
What is the likelihood of you doing that?
Time or anybody expressing any interest for that to happen.
Yeah.
Well,
if you're listening, studio execs or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so distinctly to your voice. And so there are moments when these things happen, like on Shrinking, where you're like, the same guy. You're not like, it's not even about replicating yourself. It's like this comes from the same brain.
Yeah.
And I mean, the closest is there's a scene in Shrinking season 1 where you're supposed to be playing backing piano for your friend to propose.
You told me to think of some things, and this was a scene I was going to bring up.
And it's immediately the thing about all of these scenes is like, it's just like a sad thing that is happening. And so you play the scene in Shrinking where you're playing piano for your friend because you are, it's wrapped in sort of your feeling about your wife passing away. And you just play it sad and then you throw up. But that is not like, it's not like a funny throw, but it is like, to me, it's like one of the funniest scenes of the show.
Thanks.
And it just really is like, that's the guy. That's the thing that he can do.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the reason that I thought of that scene is because I have an aversion to things calling themselves comedies that are just pleasant.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like it kind of like passes for comedy that you like kind of have a little smile on your face.
Yeah.
I come from a school of comedy where like big heavy hitter comedians who I admire, fucking like Kristen Wiig and Sandler and Jack Black and Will Ferrell and all these amazing, Kate McKinnon, are making you like cackle, Melissa McCarthy, just like these giant fucking laughs. And so I think a big set comedy piece is important. That where there is the thing about comedy that I think is the real measure is it's binary. You're either laughing or you're not.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great test. Like, did it make you laugh? Sometimes in writers' rooms, people are like, "That's funny." I'm like, "That's not good enough." Your face is frowning.
You get Freaks and Geeks when you're 18, 19. You then are in Undeclared in North Hollywood. Like, essentially, the time period you would be in college, you were in Judd Apatow Project. Is there, beyond advice, do you remember any specific day on any of these sets that was sort of foundational in one way or another?
There's a moment when Seth and I are I don't think he'll mind me telling this story. There's a moment where Seth and I are on Freaks and Geeks and The Matrix came out and we smoked a bunch of weed and we went to opening night of The Matrix and we walked out of that like that movie changed everything. And also this idea of like, we need to fucking attack. Like, you know what I mean? We were young. Like I said, there was like the naivety of youth of like, why can't you?
Yeah.
And I just remember this relationship of camaraderie, specifically with Seth, of like, we can do this. There also was this like really like blissful period. It's only happened on a couple other projects, but Freaks and Geeks, it was every time. We would get the scripts and a bunch of us would get together at my house on Saturday and Sunday and rehearse the scripts alone. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. Like we would sit there and we would like go through the lines. We would think of alts. Like there's a lot of freedom on Freaks and Geeks when we were shooting. And we were all fucking like, we had our eye on the prize. Like we're going to make this the best show that ever existed on TV. And then we got canceled like after 13 episodes. I've told this story before, but it is true and it is so funny to me now knowing how things work. We knew we were going to get canceled because when we started the show, there was this lavish craft service table of like the most beautiful snacks, like Uncrustables and shit, whatever they're called. And like by like episode 6 or 7, it was down to like a box of Corn Pops and some creamer, and we were like, "Oh, we're getting canceled."
Is there a scene from Freaks and Geeks that was instructive for you as an actor to realize what you could play? Like, this is a thing that I didn't realize I was able to do. This is how people see me, right? This is like Judd and Paul were writing how they perceive you, especially as they were sort of going on. Like, was there something where...
There's a scene I could do better now. Sure. This is why I have mental problems. It's like 25 years later.
Reshoot it.
Can we run this back? Where I tell Linda that I was Lindsay that I like I need to go off to fight in the war because like I failed at a drum audition or something, and I'm trying too hard. I'm trying too hard in that scene, but. There are other scenes like when I sing Lady to her in the basement where I'm like, this is when I start to discover, you asked me like, what's unique. I can walk this line between charming and creepy, and just at the last moment, tip to charming.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets really close to creepy in a way that I think is like really fun. But I think maybe like the most important moment happened because I had to sing a song on guitar that I had to write because I was like writing a little music at that time called Lady L.
Mm-hmm.
And Judd told me this on a Thursday. Hey, tomorrow I need you to sing a song to Lindsay on guitar. You just write it. Like we don't have somebody to write it. And I said, well, can it be on piano? I only play piano. And he said, no, it needs to be guitar because Seth's going to bust it. I said, Judd, I don't play guitar. He said, you'll figure it out. And, it's an interesting thing because like what option was there?
Yeah.
I had to figure it out. And so I figured it out.
Yeah.
And I've realized that that's probably true of everything, like of all of us. And like fear gets in the way. But I do believe in my bones I will figure it out.
Yeah. It really is like that is a different sort of way of shaping a comedic mind than being like, okay, here's advice of how to write a script. It's like truly like empowering people. It's like ultimately what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, he said this other thing, which actually was the most defining thing, and it is advice, was he said, look, if you can improv like this, then you can write. I'm going to teach you how to write because, there's like structure and stuff. But the only way you're going to make it in this business is if you write your own material.
Yeah.
And it was the best advice I ever got because to this day, like I'm pretty successful, but I do not get offered the parts I want. I have to write them.
I've heard you say that. I wonder. It's like, so let's say you didn't listen to him. You're like, screw you, Judd.
Yeah.
You get How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
There is a career, but I think you saying the career I think you will want, right? You could, if you do How I Met Your Mother, you can get another sitcom.
Yes.
Of diminishing quality, hypothetically.
For the rest of your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
What he was saying was, I think, slightly the note behind the note was like.
The note behind the note is that you are unique.
Yeah.
And the only way you're ever going to be able to express your uniqueness is if you write your own material.
Yeah.
And also, the thing that I've really learned over now 25 years is anytime you want to make a pivot, no one gives a shit. So you're responsible. You're responsible for the pivot.
I want to talk to you about pivot. So, comedy is made up of eras, and it's possible to know when the culture is going to move on and in what way. And like that time where like all of y'all were making movies and you're inspired is clearly an era. You've been open about 2014 and sort of a lot of sort of things ended at the same time, and you had this moment of reflecting the sort of work you've done, the work you want to do. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time there because it's so instructive of sort of where you are now. First is Sex Tape comes out, a movie you wrote, you star in, and it does solidly financially. I actually sort of forgot about it.
Yeah.
Because it did seem, though it did all right, not to feel like zeitgeisty as the other things you were doing.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? How did it feel like when it felt like, oh, I am not the cutting edge. I'm not part of where comedy is right now.
When I was trying to figure out why I was doing any of this, and I went on this exploration, this is after that, of like working with people I admired, I would ask people all these questions, like how do you choose parts? How long do you wait between movies? Do you look at the paycheck? Do you like all these really reductive questions because I hadn't really thought about them or had somebody teach me that stuff. And one of the questions I would ask was, what is art? And a really great actor said to me, he thought for a minute, and he said, I think art is performing an act of self-exploration on behalf of an audience. So it's like, I'm gonna explore something that I'm really thinking about, and hopefully that will be of use to the audience watching because maybe they're thinking about the same thing. I think actually that's the leap of any artist, of any medium, saying like, this is something that I am struggling with, and I think it should be something you're struggling with. And by me going through it, maybe it will help other people going through it. And looking back retrospectively, I think at that period, I was not doing that. At 24 or 25, writing for Eating Sarah Marshall, that was what I was going through. Every breakup felt like your heart was broken. But at 33 years old, making a movie about being afraid of girls is just dishonest. You know what I mean? I'm 6'4". I have like a bunch of money at this point. I'm famous, and I'm like, oh, I hope it works out with this girl.
I hope a girl's not mean to me.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so I think that translates. I think that you feel like that's not vital, like what they're going through. So I think I was thinking at that point, because I was in distress emotionally during that point. I was thinking less about how it felt in relationship to the business, and I was thinking more like, why do I not feel good?
Yeah.
Like on paper, I have won. You know, I had like giant TV show and movies that were doing really well, but I really didn't feel like of value. And actually, Jonah Hill said something to me that was really worthwhile, where he said, look, you can't take another job ever for a paycheck. You get to say that once, but we've gotten our paychecks. Now, like, why are we doing this? And that was a really good piece of advice too. And so I think since then I try to make sure that anything I do is like reflective of where I am at a given moment. Yeah. But yeah, that moment, that period in 2013, 2014, we're also, look, How I Met Your Mother is one of the best things that ever happened in my life. But we're also 9 seasons in at that point, and you're like starting to vaguely repeat ideas and storylines. You're like, okay, is this guy going to meet the wife or what? You know what I mean? Like starting to tip into weird, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just was feeling like none of this is really what I'm actually thinking about right now.
Yeah, I want to ask about How I Met Your Mother in terms of like the job of it, right? Yeah. Regardless of the creativity, because I think it reflects about a lesson that you've learned. So I want to put it this way, which is, do you remember the best day on set shooting it and the worst day on set, or maybe a frustrating day on set?
The best day on set, and I actually mean this sincerely. When we shot the last scene of How I Met Your Mother, I was really flooded with an immense sense of like gratitude and accomplishment of that me and this group of people, like that was our 20s.
Yeah.
We did it all together. We all liked each other by the end. We all felt good about it. It came to a dignified end. I think that I cried hysterically during that last scene, like disproportionate to the occasion. You know, I think that was honestly my best day. What a cushy 10 years that was.
So I want to talk a little bit about your 2020 anthology series, Dispatches from Elsewhere.
I love that we're talking about dispatches.
Well, it's just like, I remember when you did it, I was like, oh, it's cool. He's doing like a weird elf thing. I'm sorry that's not dismissive. It's
no,
sort of like it. Well, I'll put it this way, since you said that, which is like, it did feel like I want to expand the bounds in which people see me, even if they don't even see this show.
Yeah, it brought me out of a hole I was in. The process of making that show was so meta in terms of, and I wrote it to be this way, but it is about somebody coming out of being trapped in their own head, acceptance about themselves, and coming out on the other side like, this is who I am, and that's great. And it ends with everybody saying, I am you, all these people from around the world. Because I think that we all go through these periods. Like, each of those characters was designed to be somebody who was not feeling reconciled with their inner self. And realizing, God, we must, to some level, I sure believe, like, my artistic leap of faith is that we all feel that way.
Yeah.
Just another thing about Dispatches was I hadn't written anything since, like, Muppets. And anything that I really felt like was me, you know? And I got sober in 2013, and I stopped finding things funny. I was like having this moment of, like, we talked about, like, I know how to write about a guy being afraid of girls, but I don't really know how to write about anything else. And what I was going through was not funny. And I saw this documentary about this experience that people had in San Francisco that was just like art for art's sake and reminding people of childlike wonder. And I watched this thing and I had, for the first time in like 7 years, I had the thought of like, I want to write this. And I followed that instinct and I just started writing, and it was the first thing I wrote in like almost a decade. And it's what I do, you know, what I do is write. And I was very scared. I don't know if I'm going to be able to write again. Like I was having all these fears. And writing that series is the Dracula musical.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You ask like, how does it evolve? That series is full frontal nudity. That series is the Dracula musical, laid out in whatever way that I wanted to, you know? And yeah, I still like, I hope that show ends up on Netflix or something someday so people can see it.
Yeah, so there's a line in the first episode. It's basically introducing the problem, the philosophical problem the show is going to wrestle with. But it reminded me of your career and sort of a meta comment on the life of making a certain type of TV show. So in the first episode, Richard E. Grant is introducing the show at large and the monotony of your character's life. And he says of your character that he is, if you ended your day in the same place you began it, with no change, every day like the others, with the exception of meaningless and arbitrary deviation. And this is a tragedy in its most quietly devastating costume. A life without risk, a life without real pain, a life without real joys. This is existing, not living.
Yeah. I wrote that.
I know. How does it feel? Like I could hear you breathing about it, and it is, you wrote it. What is that? Do you remember writing that?
Yeah, sure. I remember feeling that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt every ounce of everything I wrote in that show, which goes back to our thing. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is where I found myself at like 32, 33 years old, which is like, you can't have a pity party when you're like doing so well, but it also doesn't matter, you know, like I was really not feeling good. And I think you got to be brave. You have to be brave. Like, it's the whole point of making art is to be brave. And I think that by the time I got to kind of the end of the run of like stage one of my career, I was doing a lot of stuff that required like 20% of my resources. Does that make sense?
Well, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very low percentage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, by the time you're on season 9 of a TV show, you really know how to do it. You know, it's like, that's the point of a sitcom.
Yeah.
The point of a sitcom is the repetition of it, so that when it goes to syndication, you can check in to any episode and it feels familiar. It feels the same, you know? There's that old, I don't know, it's like kind of trite idea of like, if you're not afraid, it's not, you know, you're not challenging yourself. Yeah. I think there's some truth to that. I just think that it's a really potent recipe for something to work and to be electric if you're not sure if you can pull it off. Like David Bowie has an amazing quote about that, about walk out into the water, and as soon as your feet can no longer touch the ground, that's a potent place to make art. And I think that's true. My feet were on the ground for a long time towards the end of phase 1.
One other thing that was, I think, partly related to sort of your feeling about what it means to sort of create in the Hollywood system is, so in 2014 also the Muppets Most Wanted comes out, which is you were not involved in, even though it's essentially a sequel to the Muppets movie you made. And you talked about the Muppets were a huge influence for you. Making that movie was a dream for you. It was to get to do that was almost like a real drive. But you had to do it in collaboration, air quotes, but in essentially like conflict with the people who were the stewards of the Muppets estate. And I think it probably was, up that point, Judd allowed you guys a certain amount of freedom, and then you're in this position. So can you talk a little bit about making Muppets where you are making a thing that you're dreaming about, but also sort of wrestling with sort of these other creative forces?
I mean, it was a weird thing to do that movie. I just like talk about lack of strategy.
Yeah.
I had just made Forgetting Sarah Marshall that like did really well. Okay, so it did
It
really
is
well.
funny in this era where there's no comedies get released at all.
Yeah.
To be like, there was a time period where you specifically made a giant hit and it was just a romantic comedy.
Yeah. So then you know how the business works. Like after that happens, they're like, "What do you want to do now?"
Yeah.
You know, you got some juice. And I was like, "I want to make the Muppets." And they were like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like that's not how this goes." And I said, "No, I want to make the Muppets." Because I love them, and also I've never been that strategic.
Mm-hmm.
I like probably could have maximized all of this a little bit more, but it's like every 4 or 5 years I make something that I'm really fucking proud of, and I'm learning that that's a good path. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a good path for me.
Speaking of sort of working with studio, what do you think of working for Apple, especially at this time where it appears the upper tier of Apple corporate, which is well above the Hollywood portion of Apple corporate, is like debating if the studio is spending too much money or even like if the entire project is worth it. What is your feeling about Apple specifically and sort of the streaming climate? I'm
saying this not because they're my bosses. Like it's been dreamy.
Mm-hmm.
They love shrinking. I think, you know, you get a particular experience if something works. You know what you know what I mean? And so I can't speak to what it's like if something is not working, but you know, Bill Lawrence was coming off of Lasso, and which is like the biggest hit that ever existed on television, and then we went into shrinking, and shrinking works, and shrinking has a lot of heart and people love it. And so my experience with them has been nothing but like lovely.
So we speak now a decade or so removed from 2014 and that moment where you reflected about the work you wanted to make. In so much as shrinking is rooted in similar ideas of characters who are stuck and figuring out how to unstick themselves.
Yeah.
How did you get unstuck?
That's a great question. Well, it took a lot of time. I went through a lot of fear of like, you know, it's like identity shedding. Because I started at 18 years old being very specific guy, you know, and I think at 33 years old, I was like, but I'm not that guy, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I need to shed it. And I'm sure a lot of people go through this, you know, but I need to shed it and figure out like who I am today. And then these check-ins need to be way more frequent. That's how you end up at like a midlife crisis, right? It's like someone waits till 45 to do the check-in. I realized I had gone about a decade before I like checked in and just did whatever those like micro adjustments. It's like cleaning out your car every few days as opposed to waiting till it's a mess, you know? Grown-up shit. Really, it's just grown-up shit.
Yeah.
And so I started just paying attention to where I was at any moment and what I was thinking about and making sure that what I was writing was reflective of that, regardless of strategy and if it was going to be a big hit or if people were even going to buy it or like it. Sometimes you make a piece of art and you hang it in your garage. You know, you know what I mean? And that's doesn't make it any less meaningful to you. Honestly, Dispatches from Elsewhere was seen by very few people, and the people who did see it, like who it resonated with, it was very meaningful to them. And it's like really meaningful to me. It has as much value to me, more value than some giant hits that I'm like, oh no, don't say that one when you say you recognize me. You know what I mean?
Now I'm like, what is the thing he's least proud of from his entire catalog?
You know, it's interesting. I've done like now with a little distance, like when you're immediately having them, you have shame, whatever. But now I look back and I'm like, your fucking hit rate's pretty good. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I've made so much that I'm proud of. I don't keep much memorabilia, but I have like posters of the movies that I made that I've never hung up. And I got them out of storage the other day because we were moving. And I was looking at them like, oh, there's really good stuff in here.
Will you name the project that you used to be most
embarrassed?
No, never, because you know what? People work as hard on those as they do on the ones that I love. You never set out to make something shitty.
Yeah.
You know?
Part of what you approached your career was you went into jobs looking to learn.
Yes.
And you specifically would just ask people questions. And I just want to ask you specifically people you worked with and what you learned directly from them or learned from working with them. Do you remember a day working with Jesse Eisenberg where you learned something from him?
Oh, yeah. I steal a lot from Jesse Eisenberg. No, I really do. I learned a lot sitting across doing scenes from Jesse Eisenberg. And I steal from him shamelessly. My performance in Winning Time as Paul Westhead is ripping off Jesse Eisenberg and Into the Tour. I do a ton of his mannerisms, like with the confidence that we're dissimilar enough that you won't be able to tell. But he does... There's just something he does with his face, these kind of like micro expressions of dissatisfaction in that movie that I've taken with me to a bunch of projects. I think he's a master at that, of like, in that movie, End of the Tour, he is listening to me with this, he has to put on the facade of fascination, but he has contempt.
Yeah.
You know? And it was like a master class in that duality.
Yeah. Working in Winning Time, do you remember something you learned from Adrien Brody where you were playing Paul and he was playing Pat Riley?
He really was aware of like the set, of everything around him, and like a real mastery of film acting. You know, like understanding when to flick a lighter. I'm a little more loosey-goosey, you know? I'm like, what's happening? Like, let's go. Let's go. He really understands like film acting and where the fucking camera is and how to maximize like the emotion of a moment. I learned that from him. It's like, and he seems effortless at it, but he knows exactly what he's doing.
What did you learn shooting with Andre 3000 in Dispatches?
Dude, Andre 3000, in addition to being an amazing actor, but he is my model for how to carry yourself on a set. He is a leave no trace performer. He shows up, he knows his lines perfectly. If he has a question, he asks it, but he does his acting and he disappears into the night. And you're like, fuck, like he never was there anything besides like the work. There was no pretense. There was no ego. I remember being really scared of giving the finale to people of Dispatches from Elsewhere because it's like a big swing writing wise, and I tried to copy Infinite Jest in that the end of Dispatches leads back into the beginning, leads back into episode 1. And there were some people who like weren't thrilled with the ending. And talk to me about it.
Actors.
People, yeah, sure. And
now it's like, look up the actors in that.
No, that's so.
TV show.
So I hadn't seen André yet, and I'm like a little nervous to see André because I've had some people have a hard time with it. And André walks onto set and he sees me and he said, "Hey, you made a loop." And I said, "Yes, thank God, I made a loop." And he said, but he's the guy for that show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's the guy for that show.
He's like, exactly.
He's like, yeah, man, you made a loop. Cool.
What have you learned from Harrison Ford?
Working with Harrison Ford has been one of the honors of my life. Look, there's so many things I've learned from Harrison Ford. The first one being the first thing he does, which is so generous, is whatever awe that he knows is going to exist in the dynamic, he fucking busts right through and makes you feel like his contemporary, like you belong there. and he asks you questions and all this stuff. So all of a sudden, I felt like tremendous ease. I learned a ton from him acting-wise, but what I've learned from him more than anything is like personal stuff about like, hey, you're doing great. You know, like it's all of this other stuff that you're complicating your head and your heart with. It's like, it's never going to go away. So give into it and just know you're doing great. And it's nice. It's nice to be talked to that way.
Yeah.
You know?
So, we talked a lot about the past, but I want to look forward a little bit. So, you're currently shooting the 3rd season of Shrinking. At the start of the show, your co-creator, Bill Lawrence, said he had planned out 3 seasons of the show. As you're shooting it, does it feel like a final season?
I'd be really surprised if it was the final season. You know, like it's like, I don't know. We've all been around a long time. It seems to be doing really well. Yes, maybe it's the final season. Maybe. You never know. I don't know. We're all having a great time.
Yeah.
You know, we're all having a great time. The stories haven't run dry. I know there are ideas for how to make sure they don't run dry. I think the real truth of when the show will end is when we as creators call it. Like when we say, I mean, look, Apple could pull the plug. I don't know. But I think when we feel like we're repeating ourselves or that we've run out of things to say, then we'll call it.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's part of the lesson, the hard lesson you learned from How I Met Your Mother is the feeling of this is a show that is not as creatively vibrant as it once was, and you don't want to...
I only get to do so many things in my life, I'm realizing. And like, boy, like you're getting older and all of a sudden like this like 85 all of a sudden seems so much closer than it did when I was making Forgetting Sarah Marshall. We're like, oh, this will be endless. I'm like, oh no, but probably by like 65, I'm going to want to really slow down. That's like only 20 more years.
Yeah.
A project takes a year and a half. You're like, oh, I got like 15 things left, you know? And so, yeah, I want to do stuff that I'm proud of.
We talk a lot about risk. Is there a risk you'd like to take?
I would really like to play a proper villain. I just did a movie where I'm pretty darn close. I end up tipping hero, but is not a great guy. I think that like line of charming to creepy could be really interesting if I tipped it the other way. You know?
Yeah, or even like it's a trick where they think you're like, oh, he's doing his thing of being charming to creepy, but actually the whole time he was being creepy to charming. So now it's time for the final segment of the show. It's called a Laughning Round. It's like a lightning round, but because it's a comedy podcast, I call it the Laughning Round.
Okay. Have I been funny enough for a comedy podcast?
I think you've been funny enough for this comedy podcast.
Okay, great.
We'll see. We'll see what my producer says.
Okay, great.
This is it's my show.
Yes. Oh, you get to do what you want.
Yeah.
Great.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. There we go. We just added a laugh.
What do you remember from your week hosting SNL?
Oh, man. Okay, so now we're talking. So this was the best weekend of my life because I think on Friday night, I did David Letterman for the first time. I'd never done David Letterman. This is a dream come true. Saturday night, I hosted SNL with the Muppets. And then Sunday, we took a train to Washington, D.C., to the White House, where I showed Barack and Michelle Obama Muppets with a group of veterans. It's like the craziest 3 days of a young man's life. So I was waiting. You're waiting in this room. You're waiting in this room in the White House. And then all of a sudden, you feel Barack Obama's coming. No one has to say anything. You just know. He's coming in. So he walks into the room and he sees me and he puts his arms out, and he says, "Hey, I love you, man." Because I had made a movie called I Love You, Man. And I froze up. I'd also been up all night the night before hosting SNL. And I said, "I love you too, Mr. President." and then he said, "I hear you're doing a screening of the Muppets over at Georgetown later." And I said, "You should come, Mr. President. There'll be free snacks." And then he said, "Because that's what's missing in my life, free snacks." And he left the room. I think about it all the time, and I sweat profusely.
It's wonderful. And the like, for how much people talk about like SNL and 50th anniversary, it's like, yeah, that was sort of like the entree point to my Barack Obama story.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for an aspiring actor, writer, comedian?
I think it's important to celebrate every step, because if you keep moving the goalpost, you're never going to get there. So a great audition, celebrate. You write the end on a script you're writing, celebrate. That I try to keep that in mind. Like, if you keep waiting for what's opening weekend, do we get nominated? Did it do well? Like, you're going to miss it. Like, don't miss it. That's the key for me.
Can you think of a joke, a scene, or a moment that didn't work for one reason or the other for other people, but you will go to your grave being like, that was funny and everyone was wrong?
Yeah, I wrote with two of my really good friends, Bart Nickerson and Ashley Lyle, a script for Space Ghost, the movie, live action Space Ghost, that for all sorts of reasons didn't end up getting made, but it's one of my favorite things that I've ever written with them. The basic arc of it was that, so Space Ghost in real life has had 3 iterations. There was like the 1960s Space Ghost where he was as famous as Batman for like a brief little moment in that old like spandex superhero era. Then he got brought back as an ironic talk show host, as we all remember, our generation. Then in this like modern superhero era, they tried to bring him back as like grizzled Space Ghost, right? There's like a limited run of comics. So we wrote a script that was the arc that he started. He was like the superhero who got left behind, became kind of a washed up talk show host. And then because of some shit that happens, all of the other superheroes are off planet when there's an on-world thing, and he has to like rise from the ashes and step into his own manhood. Yeah. It's classic Jason Segel.
Yes. What was your best day ever on set?
You know, there's a speech that Harrison Ford gives at the end of season 2. It's the best acting I've ever seen in person. Where I thought to myself, this is the luckiest you'll ever be. Don't forget this moment. Like, you're watching an idol, one of the greats, bare his guts on screen in front of you in an environment where we're equals.